All right, welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Susky. I am Director of Programs at the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education, and I'm going to be serving as your facilitator for the hearing today. This is going to be the Unit 4 hearing for the We the People National Invitational for Faith Lutheran School. In a moment, I'm going to have the judges introduce themselves, and of course, the students will then do the same before we begin the hearing. The hearing is going to be a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of follow-up questions from the judges. My microphone is going to be muted during the hearing, but I will be holding up the 1-minute end time signs. For that reason, I do recommend that everyone have their view on gallery view so that you can see my time cards, and of course that you can see each other and your judges. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will give brief feedback to the team, and then we'll be on our way. With that, I'll go ahead and hand things over to your chairperson to begin the introductions.
Okay, well, welcome. Let me see, who do we have here today? Faith Lutheran, so great. Welcome, welcome to everyone. And Ryan's explained the procedures here. My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina. I've been involved with the program for a number of years. We very much look forward to this every year, so relax. We're going to learn some things that you can teach us about the Constitution.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations on coming to the National Invitational. My name is Diana Owen. I'm a political science professor at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Deshawn Whitaker, a We the People teacher in Charles County Public Schools in Maryland.
Okay, please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Hi, I'm Nicole Cook.
I'm Maddie Murray. I'm Amanda DeVries.
And I'm Wyatt Carroll.
And we're here at Faith Lutheran Middle School with our teacher, Mrs. Carroll, and we'll be presenting Unit 4.
Okay, great. Well, we are going to look at question 1 today. And so I will read that question for everyone's reading or hearing pleasure here. An American historian claims that the ratification debates were one of the greatest and most probing public debates in American history. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your response? Evaluate the major arguments the Federalists advanced in support of the ratification of the Constitution. Evaluate the major arguments the Anti-Federalists put forth in opposition to ratification of the Constitution. Why did a Bill of Rights become a focal point for both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? You may begin.
The Federalists had many major arguments when they were trying to ratify the Constitution. They used the Federalist Papers to help convince people why the Constitution needed ratification. The first debate was whether or not the government would have too much power. In Federalist Paper number 70, written by Alexander Hamilton, it argues that a strong executive branch of government is essential for the nation's success, arguing that it is essential to the protection of the community against foreign attacks. It is essential to the steady administration of the laws, to the protection of property, to the security of liberty against the enterprise and assaults of ambition, of faction, and of anarchy.
Another issue is whether or not the Constitution provides for the Republican government. History shows factions destroyed small republics in the past. This is why they thought that a larger republic where power is divided between the national and the state governments is a better solution. This would create an organized government. It would be harder for special interests to work against the common good. In Federalist Paper number 39, James Madison stated, "We may define a republic to be a government which derives its power either directly or indirectly from the great body of the people and is administered by persons holding their offices during pleasure for a limited period or during good behavior."
The third main argument debated was the necessity of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists thought that there was not a Bill of Rights and that would be protected. In Federalist Paper number 84, it states that we do not need a Bill of Rights. A Bill of Rights will give the people the impression that they can only expect protection for the rights that are listed.
The Anti-Federalists had arguments against ratifying the Constitution. These arguments were about political corruption. The Anti-Federalists thought that it was a huge threat, so they believed in the importance of restraining government power. This led to another argument, which was about the government's potential to become corrupt and seize more power until it interferes with the people's natural rights, eventually completely ruling the people. In the Anti-Federalist Papers, it states, the new form of government declares a consolidation or union of all 13 parts or states into one great whole. It is an intuitive truth that is a consolidated Republican form of government will lead into a monarchy, either limited or despotic. As said in the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalists feared that the ratification of the Constitution would lead to a monarchy similar to the one that they fought hard to leave.
A lot of anti-federalists wanted a weak central government because they associated a strong government with tyrant Britain. They even created their own papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, in rebuttal to the Federalist Papers. Anti-Federalist Paper number 85 concludes that the Constitution must be drastically revised before adoption to protect the rights of the people.
Nixon versus United States was a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that determined the question regarding whether the Senate correctly tried an impeachment. This correlates to the anti-federalist fears of whether the Constitution contains the right protocol for various scenarios as seen in Nixon versus United States, and who has the power to decide. To compromise with the Federalists, the anti-federalists proposed a Bill of Rights. The anti-federalists would only accept the Constitution with the Bill of Rights as it gave a sense of security over their own rights. Our Bill of Rights consists of many rights such as the freedom of speech, right to bear arms, and trial by jury, which were important to the anti-federalists and still to citizens nowadays.
The Federalists believed that the Constitution protected the people's liberties the way it was, but the Anti-Federalists thought that the language used was often vague and did not do a good enough job in protecting the people. They needed to make a compromise in order to ratify the Constitution. That compromise was the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was a document that specifically stated the people's rights and how they would be protected. The Anti-Federalists thought that the Constitution did not explicitly outline the rights of the people. Therefore, nothing stops the government from taking them away.
The Bill of Rights was the only thing keeping the anti-federalists from ratifying the Constitution, and this is why it became the focal point of the ratification debates. Eventually, the Federalists realized that they needed to get the anti-federalists to ratify the Constitution, so they agreed to the Bill of Rights being added. It remains a vital part of our country. Despite the Bill of Rights being added to prevent the government from taking away our rights, the Founding Fathers agreed there should be some limit on what it protects, and that courts should decide these limits. An example of this is Gilbert versus Minnesota. In this case, a man publicly expressed his disapproval of American participation in World War I. He was sentenced to a year in jail and a $500 fine. He submitted an appeal saying the law took away his First Amendment rights. The court sided with the states, saying that during a time of war, criticism of the government is beyond the protection of the Constitution. We are now ready for our questions.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You talked about the rights that we have as being important, and yet in the last case you cited, you suggest that they can vary over time, that Mr. Gilbert did not have the same free speech rights during time of war that he would if in a time of peace. Do you think that would have been something the Anti-Federalists were concerned about or would have predicted? What do you think the Anti-Federalist position would be on that?
I don't think the Anti-Federalists, they were for the Bill of Rights because of the Constitution. They were afraid that with the Constitution, the government would take away their rights. But I think the Federalists would have seen that with time, the Constitution is actually necessary because the Bill of Rights and the Constitution work together to protect our rights. And I believe that with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Anti-Federalists would have thought that maybe in this case of Gilbert versus Minnesota, that his First Amendment right was being suppressed in a certain way. But then again, they would also see it's the government's job and the Constitution's job to protect its own, like the nation. It's their job to protect the nation against any foreign attack or like any person trying to bash, like not really bash, but just like talk about, like criticize the government and what they're doing.
The Anti-Federalists only proposed a Bill of Rights as they feared that political corruption would soon overtake the government. And so I don't really think that they would foresee this in the near future.
So I was wondering, do you think that the Bill of Rights today does a good job or not a good enough job of protecting the people's rights?
I believe that the Bill of Rights does an amazing job of protecting the people's rights. For example, Joe Biden is proposing gun control plans, and if these plans get passed, there's a good chance that they could take away our Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. So if we didn't have the Bill of Rights, these rights could be taken, our freedoms could be taken away a lot easier than if we didn't have them.
I agree with my colleague, and to add on to what she said, in Tigger versus Des Moines, these students, their First Amendment, I mean, without the Bill, I feel like the Bill of Rights does an exceedingly well job at protecting our rights and our freedoms, as seen in Tinker versus Des Moines, because these students, without the Bill of Rights, they wouldn't have anything to go to court with, or neither would they have something to be like any right to be infringed upon. And with that right of the First Amendment to freedom of speech, they wouldn't have been able to freely express their opinions and beliefs. And I feel as a student that it is necessary for our rights of the First Amendment to be protected, so I can share what I believe respectfully and feel safe and comfortable with stating what I believe.
Thank you. You mentioned the U.S. versus Nixon as one of your court cases. Could you provide some more insight into this court case, please?
So during the court case in US, Nixon versus United States, President Richard Nixon, he made a false statement to an open crowd, and then he was later tried and impeached, and the impeachment was not successful.
This correlates with the Anti-Federalist fears of them. They were unsure that with the Constitution, because if the Constitution was so vague, they were unsure that the Constitution could provide for all the different methods of how to correctly go about things such as impeachment in this example, in this court case. And so they wanted to make sure, they were scared that the Constitution wouldn't do good enough to protect the rights of the people. So maybe as former President Nixon's First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and their fear was that the Constitution wouldn't have the right scenarios and protocols for how to correctly go about an impeachment.
That leads us into talking some more about the executive. You said that one of the major issues between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was the idea of how strong the executive branch ought to be. Do you think who do you think won that debate? Would the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists be satisfied with our current power of the presidency?
I personally feel that the Federalists would be more satisfied with the current way that our government works, because the Federalists wanted a very strong national government and weaker state governments. And so I personally believe that the national government has the ability to trump the state laws, and that their laws are, the highest law possible. And the Anti-Federalists wouldn't like this because they wanted more state-controlled governments, because they were afraid that if we had too strong of a national government, it might become more like a monarchy, like they just escaped.
I agree with my colleague, and I definitely feel like the Anti-Federalists wouldn't be too happy with how our government is run today. They definitely would have realized that our Bill of Rights is important to us, every citizen today, and they'll probably be proud of how well it's held up in history and through time. But I definitely believe that the Federalist viewpoint is prominently seen in our government today, as our central government is definitely more powerful than our state governments, as they do have the power to trump other laws made by our state governments.
So you mentioned early in your presentation about the concerns that that some of the Federalists had about factions. It's even in Federalist 10 referred to as the mischiefs of faction. Can you elaborate a little bit more about why they were concerned about factions?
The Federalists were concerned about factions because they believed that if the state governments were really strong, that certain states would more take one or the other political side, creating separation between the states. And if the state governments was really strong, then they would make their laws, and they could even go against another state and make a law saying people from this state can't enter our state because we don't agree, we don't have the same beliefs as they do.
And what our founding fathers wanted was unity, and when they escaped Britain, that was what they wanted. They wanted freedom, and they wanted unity, because in Britain they didn't have that sense of freedom over their rights, and they were really divided. So they definitely wanted for all of us to be united as one whole. That's like America and the Union.
All All right, and maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't, but I'll try. How do you feel about political parties today and their role in our government?
I personally believe that political parties play a very big role in our government. And when you go out and talk about politics, you're either on the left or the right. There really isn't much middle ground in today's society. And I believe that the founding fathers would disapprove of this, and they would think that we should come together and that there shouldn't be sides, just only different opinions.
I completely agree with my colleague, and
And finish that sentence.
I completely agree because I believe that the different parties are separating us as a union, and we should come together.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, we appreciate this, and we'll have a few comments for you. Very much appreciated the discussion today. That you basing your discussion on the Federalist Papers and being able to cite relevant ones are important. Wish we'd had more time to get into talking about you. You also talk about the Anti-Federalist Papers, and that's important, and people tend to equate the two, but given that the Federalists were at the convention, well, I think one could argue they had a certain strategic advantage there. Also wish we'd had a little bit more time to talk about compromise, because when we hear that discussed in contemporary politics, it's often seen as a bad thing. But you correctly pointed out that it was an important part of putting together our Constitution. And the fear of monarchy is something driving the Anti-Federalists. So very good discussion. I very much enjoyed it, and you represented your school well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleague. I thought you did a really nice job, both on your prepared remarks and in your responses to the questions. I thought that your statement was very well organized, and I also appreciate the fact that you use the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers in some ways to, provide the evidence for a lot of the points that you were making. And even in so doing, you brought in some, kind of more contemporary examples, such as Nixon versus the US. And I thought you did a good job of talking about the compromise over the Bill of Rights. But I really thought you also had a real strength in the way that you answered the questions. Talking about bringing in particular amendments and specifics like the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, talking about, the importance of having a Bill of Rights and whether you supported that and thought it went far enough. You showed a really good knowledge of the Supreme Court cases. And I actually really liked the way that you had this focus on, kind of the role of the founders or their goals in freedom, but through unity. And the fact that in your last question, dealing with political parties today, you raised the issue about partisan polarization. And I like the way that you kind of concluded everything by saying, there's no sides, there's just different opinions. And that's the way that, kind of we achieve the unity that the founders were really envisioning. So really nice job.
Yes, I agree with what my colleagues have said. I really appreciated your discussion about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers. I like how you try to compare and contrast the different sides and how they express those views. I appreciated your comments, and the follow-up question is especially about the Bill of Rights and how you felt about freedom of speech and especially students' rights. And very well done.
All right, nicely done, everyone.